It's 10 o'clock on Tuesday, July 23rd. And I hereby call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee of the Cambria Community Services District Board of Directors. We have a quorum. We have one member on an excused absence, and all the other four members of the committee are here, except myself too. We have a quorum. I don't have a chair report per se. We can talk a little bit about as we go through the process of the agenda items, and I'm going to have some comments about the future course of things. For instance, what's going to happen with the purchasing policy and so forth. And I don't know if there are any formal reports from the ad hoc subcommittees.
No,
Ms. Ritz, yeah.
The overhead allocation committee meets next week for the first time,
Okay.
and then the long range fiscal planning committee. We still have to set our first meeting. I think it'll be sometime within the next couple weeks.
Yeah. One thing I had is, again, it's a little bit of a impromptu chair report. I have been talking to Karen Dean, the chair of the Resources and Infrastructure Committee, about the possibility of our long range financial planning committee subcommittee rather, interfacing with a subcommittee on her side about capital planning, long-term capital planning, and try to get a maybe a joint effort going to coordinate, basically make them mesh properly, the capital plan and the financial plan. So we will, I think on her side, she will be pursuing that. We might have two committees that can meet together at some point hopefully fairly soon, next couple of months.
Yeah.
One thing I guess I would say, in my chair report here is that it does not appear that we will need to have a meeting next month. And so unless there's some extraordinary, things come up that we have to deal with, I think that the August meeting will be canceled. We can formally do that later, but then the next meeting would be September, I think, 24th, fourth Tuesday in September. So you sort of aim at that, the subcommittees and everybody else can aim at that as the time in which to prepare reports and come back with, progress reports, essentially information. Any committee member communications? Brief comments about your activities that are relevant to the committee, or questions, observations? Saying none? None. Move on to public comment. There's no one here in the room to comment, and at this point, see, I'm looking I'm looking at the list of participants. We have actually no one here on Zoom, so I guess there'll be no public comment. Move on. Consent agenda. The one item is the minutes. Any questions or comments or discussion on the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, the minutes be approved. I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Pearson?
Aye.
Mr. McCann?
Aye.
Ms. Chrisman?
Aye.
Mr. Henriksen?
I wasn't at that meeting.
So
I would abstain.
you'd abstain, okay. The motion passes 3-0 with one abstention. Here. So we go to the first item of regular business, which is the fiscal year fourth quarter budget report, which we would review and approve, and I would recommend with any updates, enhanced, on our side to the board of directors. I'll turn this over to Ms. Fritz.
Okay. Thank you. So this is the review of the fourth quarter budget report. So this is activity for the fiscal year 23-24 through the fourth quarter, which is June 30th, 2024. We had one budget adjustment in this quarter, which was for the water meter replacement project funding, which we went out and borrowed $680,000. So that is reflected in these reports. And the CIP list has been updated through June 30, 2024. And if you go to page 8, you can see the summary for the general fund. And you'll see the columns, original total budget, so that is what was originally budgeted in the general fund, so a deficit of 82,000. The current budget, that includes all the encumbrance roll forwards that were rolled forward from 22 to 23, brought that expected deficit to 441,000. And if you go over to the fiscal activity column, that is where you'll see where we ended our net position for the year in the general fund. So it's 120,000 surplus. So there's a few things that, I mean, we made more in our investment strategies, so that definitely contributed. One thing that reduced this amount is we paid for the bathroom. And it is budgeted in there for us to get grant revenue, but that revenue will not be seen until that restroom is installed and inspected and can be used. So that grant revenue won't come in until, I mean, hopefully 24, 25 fiscal year. So, so then on page 11 starts, you know, all of the details for the fire department. So you can see the total revenue for the fire department was 3.1 million. And then it has all the salaries, benefits, the different categories.
Could I just ask a question? on
Yes.
that?
Oh, yeah, if they want to, ask any questions as we go through, yeah.
Okay. The, on the second line under the property taxes, it's a negative number? Negative 21,000?
So we get charged an admin fee basically from the county for their work in administering the property taxes. So that is the fire department's share of that administrative fee.
Oh, I see. Okay, so they take back some of the revenue.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Of course they do.
They get their cut.
Yeah.
Retail.
It's a percentage, isn't it? It's a percentage of the total. And this is actually most of the property tax. Or about maybe 80% of the property tax, right? Is that number?
The 2.2.
Yeah, the 2.22,
Correct.
2,141,000. So,
that.
and the total is about 22 million, what?
Yeah, so they,
6,000.
yeah, the fire department gets approximately 72% of property taxes.
Yeah. You know, the county takes about 1% of that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Continue. Yeah. Please
No,
continue.
they take way more than that. In
Oh.
reality. We get a small slice of the overall.
Oh, no, yeah, they take 1% of what, of
We-
everybody's share, yeah, it's, you know, so yeah, they take, of course, the schools get most of it, but. Yeah, go on, please. Denise.
Okay, so, I'm not gonna go line by line, but there is all the detail. I'm happy to answer questions.
Just if, you know, just in general, if we could just highlight, you know, major variances, you know, positive or negative. You know, as we go through, so that way.
Okay.
we don't have to go-
Well, salaries and benefits, definitely there was, I guess a positive variance as we did not spend as much as we budgeted. I think that's I mean, I'm always budgeting for full staffing levels and what I would call conservative budgeting is at the high end of people's salary schedules that they're gonna be at for the year. If we have any turnover, which we do have sometimes in the fire department or like vacant positions for a while, or people that are hired at a lower step than what I budgeted for is, I think, attributes for most of that variance, a positive variance.
We have a, you know, decent turnover in our fire staff.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have it all in front of me to track who, I think we're gonna be stable 24, 25. We seem to have a pretty stable crew, but
Still have the safer grant doesn't expire until
December.
yeah, so.
So, but once that grant goes away, we will not have safer firefighters anymore, so it won't, I did budget for a full year of safer grant and a full year of the salaries, but if that grant goes away, the salaries go away.
Yeah.
But they have applied for the grant to extend it, and so we're hoping that we will get the grant again and, you know, be able to keep all of our
Mhm.
firefighters on staff.
It seems to me with those the two numbers to get together, salary and wages and overtime, if there is a reduction in salary and wages because positions are unfilled for a period of time, does that kind of partially get offset by more overtime because you have fewer staff?
For
Yeah.
sure,
Is that right? Yeah, you see that there.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. And you can see our overtime, we were over in our overtime budget. So we budgeted 128,000 and we spent 184.
Yeah.
But if you look at the bottom line of the salaries, we, you know, are to the good for 191,000.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the bigger ones, other than the current ones, of course, it has to do with the retirement and the pensions that are paid to all of the folks.
Mhm.
And I guess maybe because I am now drawing a pension,
Mhm.
and so it's a little bit more in my forefront of my memory or my day-to-day. But is there something that audits that? And the reason I ask is that I have it's not a relative, but it's like related to a relative person who was able to take and draw the pension that their unrelated grandfather was somehow. Is there somebody that watches that when the pensioner or whatever the title is, the person that receives the pension,
Mhm.
that when the initial person dies, oftentimes you can have it structured so that the wife or husband receives the pension from that. Is there anybody that audits this to make sure that if those people are gone, that pension stops? Just because,
So this retirement expense in here, this retirement PERS, the 01511090, that's the retirement that we pay to CalPERS for the year for our current employees.
oh, I see.
So the pensions that are getting paid to our retirees actually don't come out of our
I
accounts.
I understand.
So
they're-
I
they would
assume
be-
They're
CalPERS.
the ones that are supposed to, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
so they're
They're
doing that.
supposed to be watched.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
And what we pay is an unfunded retirement expense to CalPERS every year, which is quite a bit. It's like this for 24-25, I think it's about 600,000 plus so that's what we pay them to kind of help fund the unfunded liability of our people that are retired. So that's all calculated by an actuary and all of that stuff. So you'll see that come out of our actual expense, but what's being paid to the retiree, we don't see. So I'm assuming that they're auditing all of that. But what we do see is you can see right below there, retirees' health.
Right.
Retirees who were hired before 2012 or 2012, a date in 2012, I think it's March. They are entitled to continue their health benefits. So we pay 85% of their health benefits, and that is on that line item.
Mhm.
So that is directly, we send our retirees a check.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it stopped with us or, and I guess,
The
I
health
guess-
benefits do go on to their beneficiary.
yeah. No, I mean, as far as marshaling the money, I guess I forgot that CalPERS was involved with all of this.
CalPERS really manages that. Even so, like Denise and I, as we're approaching retirement, we go into coaching.
Yes.
You go into your CalPERS portal and you set up your own beneficiaries. So if you were to pass, depending on what you select and how much money is to be passed on to your beneficiary, 50%, 100%, it lowers your overall calculation.
Right.
So you set that up ahead of time. And so once we retire,
Mhm.
CalPERS really manages that piece of it. So if we were to pass away, beneficiaries will start collecting once
Yeah.
the death certificates.
Yeah, mine is similar to that.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Okay,
And we do communicate, and like I said, we have a portion of this health benefit piece that we do pay monthly to our retirees. And for fire, that was $49,000 for the year. But again, that's only for employees that were hired before a certain time. So again, using Matt's example, if him or I retire in the next 5 years or so, we would not be getting that ongoing medical, because we just were hired, we were not hired by the district by a certain date.
okay. Thanks.
Yes,
There aren't many of those people left.
no. No, and you have to retire. So even if they just leave the district for whatever reason, we don't get that. So I don't know if there's anyone left, actually. Well, maybe a couple people.
There's a couple fire captains, fire department that.
Oh, that's true, I'm sorry. And I think some, a water or wastewater.
Yeah, should be at least a couple water and wastewater.
Yeah.
So,
Captain, engineer,
Yeah.
and two, or water and wastewater.
Okay, so supplies and services, you can go down and see,
So this quarter, you're asking for a budget adjustment in the fire department for a bunch of,
no, that was water meters.
That was yeah, it was
The water meters
The,
was the $680,000 budget adjustment.
well, I see your current total budget
Mhm,
for on page 13 for services and supplies
mhm,
is 447 and fiscal activity is 628.
mhm. Yeah, so I mean, we're not asking for a budget adjustment for that. I mean, that's not the process for that, but we typically don't ask for budget adjustments line item by line item, but as you can see, yes, some of these like M&R vehicles, they spent 24,000, but according to the purchasing policy, we don't come before the board and ask for budget adjustments for that.
Okay,
It's within the realm of a dollar value and the limits and stuff like that, so.
okay, but they significantly overspent.
Yes, so I know M&R vehicles, all of our departments had a lot of problems with their vehicles this year, so you're gonna see that across the board. But yes, M&R buildings, there was significant expenditures, and so that were over, and so again, sit down with the fire chief and realistically look at what we have coming for the coming year, so we can ask for an appropriate amount of budget for 24, 25. But it's not within our processes and our policy to bring budget adjustments for services and supplies when you look at it all together, yes, it's a significant amount, but per expenditure, we have a limit that we're held to.
Okay,
Mhm.
any other, questions on fire? Go ahead.
um,
Dave?
And then there's a nice
Oh.
summary on page 15, just so you guys can see, you
Yeah.
know, where it's a little more detailed, but not as detailed. So it shows, the revenues by category and expense by category.
Yeah.
And so they ended with a surplus of $12,680. And we were expecting, a $92,000 deficit.
right, but, okay, so the variance, and this goes for the entire thing,
Mhm.
because I forget this every time we do this.
Mhm.
That column is the product of what other two columns?
That'd be the revenue and expense, isn't it?
So, well,
The boldface.
Original budget and fiscal activity?
It's the
or
current,
budget
uh,
and fiscal activities?
it is.
That's the year.
Fiscal activity is the year.
Yeah.
That's the whole year.
yes,
And the period activity is just a month, right?
yeah, so but he's
quarter,
asking
yeah.
about,
I know
I
it's
think
not
it's
that.
taking I think it's current
Talking
total
about-
budget less fiscal activity.
Period activity is the quarter activity.
Yes, the
Or
period
quarter,
is
is
just
it
the
quarter
fourth
or
quarter.
month? How's the software?
month, sorry.
yeah, it's a
Oh,
month.
it's a month.
Yes,
Yeah, so it just,
Okay.
so please
Tyler.
almost just ignore.
Yeah, the Tyler is,
So it's here. So.
can't make it do quarters, I guess. We discussed that before in past.
Okay, so I don't understand that. Current total, but the final line there
So the variance is the current total budget
and fiscal
less
activity.
fiscal activity.
So it'd be, negative 92.2. I guess minus
Minus
12,
another
680, 39, which
12,680.
comes to a variance of 104.
Negative and a plus came to 104.
Yeah, 104, yes.
Okay,
Any questions on that, on this?
it doesn't make any sense to me still.
Wait a minute.
Well, it says if you.
Minus 92 plus 12 is 104.
Yeah, well, the idea is if you budgeted for a deficit and you get a surplus,
Okay.
small surplus,
Right,
All right.
you're ahead by 104 essentially.
okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, continue with facility research.
Okay. Okay, so this is the same, the revenue for facilities and resources for the year was 809,000, a little bit above budget. And salaries and wages, they are salaries and wages, they had, a little bit of a cost savings. And benefits as well, and then you can see all their supplies and services, their they had quite a bit of cost savings in certain areas such as encampments and streetlight, the ranch budget, and I think we talked about that quite a few times during the year that we've made some structural changes to try and save money in those areas and get rid of some of our outside contracts and do that work in-house. As I was pointing out with the fire department, our vehicle budget skyrocketed, or expenses skyrocketed. We had, Matt might be able to talk more about what was broken there, but I think every single truck, I think when David came in, he really took care of a lot of the maintenance on the vehicles that needed to be done, as well as we had a lot of work on our tractors that got broken. So
With our fundamental shift away from contracting came using equipment that had not been properly maintained for quite a while because they weren't using it. So we went from 0 to 100 in a short period of time. David being the type of guy David is, and a mechanic, he started working on them, getting them operating, and then as things, when you're doing entire fire breaks that haven't been done by staff before on equipment that really hasn't moved very much over the course of the past 10 years, we started to see some failures pretty quickly. And, we would probably see those repairs, even if they're properly maintained, just to a lesser extent. Same thing with the trucks and things of that nature. So, the ongoing maintenance, we took a hit, and that's district wide. Both of our fire engines are down right now, so they're running out of the water tender. Haley's gonna put a blast out here in a second, but Paso Robles lent us an engine, so that just arrived. So we're gonna be running out of Paso Robles engines, so both of those engines need to be repaired. So, as we talk about some of the budgeting things that we're looking at doing in terms of long-range projections on equipment and maintenance and replacement schedules. But when we shifted away from contracting and started doing it in-house, it was a benefit, but also, when you use your own equipment, you'll start to see the wear and tear show.
Okay.
So are we tracking how that's working as far as not using the contractors? The cost, because of course contractors suck up the cost of all the maintenance on their equipment,
Mhm.
but then you're paying payroll for them too.
Mhm.
Is it making sense to go the path that we're on now?
I believe so, based on what we're seeing in terms of some of our surpluses this year. I think we're starting to see those efforts. However, I will just say that our contracting and invoices for that contracting, when we went back and did some of the research, it was not very well documented. So you'll see invoices for ice plant removal, $9,000. That's literally all that's on the invoice. And that goes back 4 years. So Haley and I pulled 4 years worth of receipts, and they were all the invoices were like that. So it's hard to really tie.
Apples to apples.
It is.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do now is we've changed the invoice form, so we do have to contract with a vendor for a large tree removal that's outside the scope of our staff. We have to have it itemized, so I want to know labor, equipment, fuel, and so we're doing that now. There was a lot of pushback, but we're doing it now. But I think it's gonna take us at least a year and a half to really start to see where the money has gone. And
Yeah, I have enough data to make that.
yeah,
comparison.
it's really hard. I have a stack at home that I looked at just the other day, because we're looking at it for the ranch.
But you're on top of it, so that's good.
We'll try, yeah.
So just
Yeah.
with budget, you're driving, improved operations, maybe putting, which lots You know, so if we have to do a certain lot every year, or we do it every few years, that way you can have a trend and aggregate
Yeah, I mean,
your bang for your buck.
we're kind of doing that with a switch over to Diamond Maps where we have all of our CCSD parcels there, and then David and his crews are going out and we debating it.
Yep.
But this is really the first year that we debated our own parcels. 10 years? A very long time, because we would always contract that piece out.
Sure.
And so, we're gathering that baseline data now on, you know, how long it takes to do that, you know. Inevitably, we have at least 193 CCSD owned parcels that we have to debate each year.
Okay, and just the last thing, going back to the equipment that we that needed the increased maintenance, was that like mostly a function of hadn't been used, or it's old, or both? I mean, obviously.
Multifaceted, so hadn't been used, hadn't been maintained, and then we had some newer staff that had never had to do this before.
Mhm.
So they're familiar a little bit with the tractors, but then they didn't realize how hard they could push these tractors and some solid training on it. You know, so David worked with them to train it, but as you're new on equipment, especially old equipment, they pushed it a little too hard.
Sure.
And so we saw some damage there, and we saw some damage with things that they didn't see, you know, a big rock got caught up in, I don't know, gearbox or something like that, and destroyed all the hydraulics, so.
And the worst thing you can do with equipment is not use it.
Exactly, yeah, so.
Yeah, and you have to remember too, this year, David hasn't been fully staffed the whole year, so
Yeah.
it is a mixed year where we still have some where we're having to contract out. But we're definitely seeing some savings with the contracting, but again, also increased savings or increased expenditures in other areas. And the bottom line is a deficit of $24,000, 24,538 for FNR, where we were budgeted for a deficit of 57,900. So,
There were a couple of abbreviations that I probably should know, and I didn't. PPT? Like on page 18?
you know, that is, so whoever set up Tyler, I'm assuming this is the naming of all these accounts came from our old system. I don't know, you know what PPT, just what PPT management department? It's like another name for the facilities and resources department.
Physical plan.
I don't know.
Property management department,
So, I
I mean,
mean,
extra P,
Hmm.
parks and property, I bet you that's a better name.
yeah, so I would have to go through and
Yeah, that's
change all of those in the system.
Okay, and M&R?
Maintenance and repair.
Oh, it's very, yeah, PP, I just, it's all over.
I know.
Um,
And then if you go under the debt service, it does say facility and resources department. So I'm assuming that the PPT was an acronym that was used historically.
I
And
think
that
it's
came
property,
over when
I
they
showed
set
the
up,
property management.
yeah,
It was just inserted there.
so we could go and change everything if we wanted to.
Maybe next,
Yeah,
for next year.
I can. work on it.
Thanks. Move along to the, no other questions, move along to the, Parks and Rec,
Okay, Parks and Rec and open
Rose.
space, so, you can see here the revenue is coming from some property tax. I have I had mentioned the East Ranch restroom grant that is budgeted for, which we will not be seeing this year. And the contribution from the CCC for the skate park. And so, you know, there's some office supplies, certain things, certain operating expenditures in here, but the majority of it is in the capital outlay, which you'll see is made up of, well, this doesn't have the detail by project, but you'll see that in the CIP listing is made up of the restroom and skate park expenditures. Mainly.
Questions?
So they're in a deficit of $216,000, which is, like I said, mainly from the purchase of the restroom.
Restroom, yeah, and then we're essentially waiting for the grant. Yeah. to fill
I
that
was
in.
in contact with them the other day and they said, once it's up and running,
Yeah.
we'll come inspect it and,
Reimbursement
yeah,
grant,
yeah,
spending money first to get it back. Admin,
okay. So administration, you can see here, the total revenue and administration was 350,000. And our salaries, our benefits.
Okay, so the interest income, is that just on the monies from the general fund, or is that?
Yes, correct. So when I received the interest income, I allocated out based upon the percentage of reserves that are allocated to each department, like, well, general fund is just one, and water, wastewater, WRF.
So that's not accrued, that you actually took that money in,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
Then my other question is, what's the big negative number in property tax?
So property tax, we bring it into the admin department and then I allocate that out quarterly to the appropriate, so it gets allocated out quarterly to the fire department, facilities and resources, a little bit goes to wastewater and
Okay, so that's just an accounting.
correct. Yep, so it should be a zero. Or if you look over on fiscal activity, it's a zero.
mhm.
Yeah.
So, okay, okay, any questions?
Okay, so the general fund ends up with a surplus?
Admin specifically, right?
Admin specifically has a $350,000 surplus.
And that a good part of that comes from raising the allocations.
That all comes from, it's equal to the revenue brought in. So the franchise fees, the interest income. Miscellaneous revenue. All of that.
But you,
Yeah.
from the original budget, we've raised the allocation. For
Yes,
everybody.
the overhead allocation, there was more spent in the general fund than we had budgeted for, correct?
Okay, but the general fund as a total ends up with a
The
net,
general
net positive,
of $120,000,
exactly.
correct? Because we, part of that 350 covered the expense of the restroom and the skate park expenditures, but the negative amount in FNR. So, because we look at general fund as a total, so that $350,000, it in general fund as a total, it got brought down to 120 because we were overspent in facilities and resources.
Right,
Mhm.
I understand that, but now we have $120,000 that we're
Correct.
going to put into the general fund reserve.
Correct.
That some of that money is taken out of water and wastewater. Because it was a allocation change that brought that $120,000 positive.
I mean,
Really, that money should be returned to those
Well-
two enterprise funds.
We will,
Their
actually,
share of
you're
that.
bring up a topic I want to discuss with the budget, because this is something, of course, we were talking about with the budget approval. I've done, I'll report on my success or whatever at getting opinions on that.
mhm.
At the point when we're doing the budget. Because this issue, we have been looking into it. And I got, not really a clear clear reading on it, because it's a rather obscure issue, but I think we should take that up when we take up the budget, because it's a matter of budgeting. It's in obviously the final budget for 2024-25 too, so I'd rather talk about then.
Mhm.
We will be talking about it.
So, yeah, I mean, we can
Yeah.
talk about it then, but it's basically a policy issue. So if we want to change our policy, we can change our policy. So,
I disagree with that, but that's.
Well, let's just continue.
I mean, that's, yeah,
Yeah.
Page 31, I had just a quick question.
Yes.
okay,
About a half dozen lines down, there's a line for council as an admin expense, I guess, and also for legal. And I just, what's different between those two?
well. One of them,
We have two,
there's quite a few. There's 1, 2, 3 lines. Or wait, no, is it just 2? One of them is our retainer that we pay, Carmel and Natasha. So we pay them a flat retainer for every month. And then one of them takes on that excess
Oh, I see.
that we spend on not only Carmel and Natasha, but also, we have a few other lawyers that we consult with for different issues,
So
One is Lieutenant Tucker, which is our litigation firm.
LCW.
Yeah, and LCW, which is personnel. and
Our
matters.
HR lawyer.
Lieutenant Tucker's been a major one because they were involved with the negotiations over the school district over the well site. So that's why they're probably the major outside firm in this last fiscal year getting paid.
So one's
Okay.
essentially retainer, the other is essentially
Right.
billable
And
hours.
we also have we pay additional money to Carmel and to cash up beyond the retainer too.
Correct.
For additional work.
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of separated that our district council that represents the district, Mr. Carmel on his retainer, if we exceed his hours, and there's monies paid above his retainer. And then when we look at Liebert, Cassidy and Whitmore or LCW, they're basically billed hourly, and if we use them, we get billed, and if we don't use them for a period of a couple months, then we don't get billed. And Lieutenant Tucker's a newer
Okay, so we had a little hiccup there with our Zoom connection being lost, so we'll just continue with Denise's summary of the enterprise funds.
Okay, so it's at WRF operations has a net income of 366,000. And WRF capital is a little misleading. It's 30, they've spent, it's only an expense. They have no revenue in there and they spent $36,448 this year. If you look at the current total budget, we'd see we were expecting a deficit of 3.1 million. And that is because we budget all of our capital projects within our operating funds. I don't know if you heard me talk about that before, but it's a little misleading. If you want to see where operationally we thought we would end the year, the original budget is we were expecting a surplus of 201,000. So just pointing that out, we have ended the year with a surplus of a total of 969,000 between all of these departments. So, but again, we budget and we spend all of our capital expenditures within this operating budget, so it's hard to separate it out to say like operationally, this is how we did.
So we didn't actually end the fiscal year $1 million to the good, or did we?
Well, we did, yes. I mean, this is actual revenue and expenditures, so that is how we did it. What I can't really tell you with how these reports come out is and I can tell you how much we spent in capital expenditures, but it's all within that operations. But yes, I mean, this is actually our net income.
Are we looking to change that?
I would like to. I mean, we talked about that in here. So the easiest like comparison is if you look at F&R and the pros department. If you look at pros, that's strictly well, and it will be next year. There was a little bit of operating in there. It's going to all just be capital expenditures. So that's what I would look to do is create like a capital expenditure fund that would kind of go along with each fund. So WRF operations and WRF capital is actually the better example is to have a separate capital fund for each operating fund.
Yeah, so we're working, I guess we're trying to develop that for the next budget, right? If you can, and this is isn't this part,
Well,
it ties in sort of to the.
I think so, and I'm not clear about who would have to, I mean, the board would have to approve that type of change, I feel like, so I think through the course of this year, the finance committee could bring that concept to the board. We do have it between the WRF operations and a WRF capital fund, so it would just be creating a capital fund for each department. But I feel like we could bring that concept before the board and then they could approve it and then I could change it.
Okay, is that part of the subcommittee work that we'll be doing?
It could be.
Yeah.
If we want it to be.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I was gonna say, it sounds like it should tie in with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard of comments along the way that some people don't like the WRF capital, the separation between the two, but accounting wise, it makes a lot of sense. And also to really get a clear vision of like, this is what we did operationally in a way that, you know, you would need me to kind of do some work to get some expenditures out for me to be able to tell you, this is how we operationally, this is how this fund performed. Which I think is an important thing when talking about making decisions and having like data driven decisions is, you know, talk about.
And even if, you know, it's easy to re-aggregate them if somebody wanted to.
Yes.
Sure, at the bottom line.
Yeah.
Just put it back together. Yeah. Is just, how does that physically take place? Is that something we can program into house or somebody at the contract would be?
No, I could just do it. I can create funds. I can create accounts.
Okay.
It would just picking a clear, and even if we did it mid-year, I could do journal entries to move expenditures over. It might look a little funny, but I could
But
do
we can
that.
see it.
Yes,
I like to think that if the finance committee was okay with it, the board would be okay.
I would hope so. Yes. Yeah.
So, I don't know what, in the interest of time, I think we
Okay.
should probably, let's broad brush this unless there's some specific things that really stand out. The water fund is the one with the adjustment. Right,
The water fund has
The
the
one with
budget
the latest
adjustment.
adjustment,
You
yeah.
can see under 11, so it's on page 44. The capital account of 11,617,00-11. the very bottom line under budget adjustments, you'll see the adjustment for water meter replacement.
Yeah.
680,000. So this is listing all of the projects that were budgeted for. $2.9 million worth of projects, but we've spent $518,000. But again, yeah, so, yeah, so that's water.
Yeah,
It's interesting that we're not revenuing as much money in water and wastewater. Especially in water.
Yep.
Because of people not using as much water as we hoped that they would. Sadly.
Yeah, the
And
revenue is,
That's a continuing saga in this district. I mean, that's what really got us in trouble. Late last decade was when people started conserving water like mad and we went from 700 plus acre feet a year to 500 plus acre feet a year. And the revenues in these departments shrank by, comparative amounts. But it seems that we're still doing a good job of conserving.
yeah,
As we raise the rates, people conserve more, so.
The rate stays up there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the trend is in actual billings in the last 3 years. The production rate, the production of water has been steady, pretty steady, around 500 acre feet a year, give or take a little bit.
Mhm.
It's been pretty, it hasn't really gone up or down much in the last several years, as I understand it. Not on billings. Might be a little different.
yeah, we'd have to look at that
Yeah.
and see, but yeah, the projected revenue, they definitely is less than what we projected. I'm using the budgeted amount is from the, analysis that our consultants did when they did the rate study,
Mhm.
4 or 5 years ago. It's not updated. I don't update that, or I just take it straight off the rate study, and it was hard. Like, I really wanted to reduce it a little bit because we have been trending lower, but I was kind of trained, like, no, just take it from the rate study. This is what they were projecting. So,
Mhm.
whether the projections were a little off, but you can see our interest income. Water got $246,000 of interest income this year. Which, we had budgeted 8,000. So that's kind of what they've seen in the past. So that really helped offset some of
Mhm.
the,
Well, it made for a nice surplus.
yes, yep.
Yeah.
So,
Which I find a little bit interesting, just comparing water and wastewater, since the sales are basically the same volume of water. Wastewater had a little less of a cut, below the projected budget, like 3% versus like 4.5%. That might be just based on the fact that the base rate for the sewer wastewater is proportionally much more, quite a bit more than the base rate for water.
Yes.
Yeah, so you don't get, you don't have as much of a consumption impact.
yeah,
Anyway, so anyway, any questions on these items, on this part? We probably should move on to the budget as soon as we can. David?
On the WRF operating,
mhm.
Mhm.
how much money do we currently have in that fund? In case we have to use the damn thing, or truck, which we still,
Well, so I
it
would,
says 893. No, that's not.
No, there's a number here, some of that.
There's,
we have the reserve, the 893,000 is set aside for reserves for spending it, but the total reserves for WRF is, I mean,
Oh, more than
that's,
that actually now.
yeah, it's in the budget, that number is in the budget.
We'll get, well, yeah.
Yeah, we can get there, but
Okay.
The
the,
operating
All right, that's
reserves
fine.
are,
We can wait till that.
yeah, because, but that specific reserve that's set aside for future, the 2 month a year operation thing, is up to like 800
mhm, 893.
and something, yeah, and.
It's above, a 2, but they, yeah, they have about 1.2 million.
Yeah,
In their reserve.
The cash reserves, for Dover operations, like 1.8 million now. As you'll see in the final budget. Total cash reserves, that's a different figure. Any other questions about the, getting back to the fourth quarter report here?
Just wanna, you can see the CIP list. I just updated that with what we have spent for the year, so you can see the detail of which projects were spent.
As far as that CIP list goes, is there somewhere maybe on the webpage where where it's actually documented what the components are to each of those programs?
Well, I put a little legend at the front and I tried to explain it. Is that for each project?
Yeah, for each project. So you can tell what it is that what all the components are, because it's pretty broad brush, how we title it. And I just wondered if there was
As far
something-
as what?
as far as what it includes.
So,
The CIP list itself?
Each
Yeah, so we have
member
line
of the
items.
CIP list. Piece.
So you're talking about like Stewart Street tank rehabilitation,
Yeah.
like what is that?
What is that?
Hmm.
Is there anything like that?
For
Anywhere?
all of the construction we have.
On the website?
Yeah, or anywhere, anywhere that I could find it. If I was just a concerned citizen and I wanted to know.
I mean, I think our water, our utility managers
I
report.
was gonna say on ongoing projects, every month, the utilities manager does a report that's in the agenda, and it's a pretty detailed layout, rundown of what's been done up to this point, and what's been done recently on each of these given projects that are actually ongoing.
Yeah.
And it's explained.
But that would just be for utility
That's
projects.
that's for water and waste, the water and wastewater projects, which are the most of it, then things like the in the fire. I don't know how much.
Well, they don't do very much, but and
Very
then
much, yeah.
the wastewater, the big SST project, we definitely have that out on the website.
Yeah.
That lists what each ECN, they call them ECNs.
Yeah.
Each one of those, you might. be familiar
And those
with
are
PG&E
sort of,
on that.
I have a separate page and everything here too,
Mhm.
a separate report.
Okay, but yeah, the one that caught my attention, not to pick on the firefighters, but there's like one of the CIPs is for like $500,000 for additional beds or
Sleeping
something.
quarters.
Oh, yeah,
Quarters,
yeah.
And I just was curious, well, I wonder what that includes. Are we building a building or are we buying beds?
Yeah,
Or
so
what is
that won't be anywhere because it's a conceptual idea right now. I don't, we don't have a formulated
I got
plan. It's just that they have stated that they have a need for a renovation to their sleeping quarters.
Okay,
So,
but to have a number, you had to do something you just don't pull $500,000 out of the air. You have to have this, like a quote from somebody that says that to blow this wall out.
They could be pretty speculative, actually.
yes,
I guess that ranking, we have tried to make this ranking system a little more, realistic about what's actually gonna happen. And it's sort of costed out fairly closely, and what stuff is
Mhm.
good to, the twos are things that are needed, the threes are really, I know, a previous finance manager did not like the term wish list. But the threes are kind of wish list.
Yeah,
And
so
so-
I would say anything with a 3, is probably just like
Yeah, you-
director.
That's
It's
way
very
down
speculative.
if you ever get to it, then we'll get the cost nailed down.
Yeah.
Twos, I think, are a little less speculative, but they're still not cost out.
Okay.
Because we haven't get, they're not funded, they're not funded, they're not gonna be funded this current year.
And
So they gotta wait at least a year away from even funding it, so.
And the quote would have no value really.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
My wife gives me a finger in the air estimates all the time.
Anyway, just continue, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then an update on our wastewater project COP list right there. And then, our debt listing, I was asked to prepare a listing of our debt, so this is all the debt we have in the district right now, on the last page, 78. And we have 2, the F-350 truck is coming off this year, we're making our last payment for that and for the VACCon truck. Um. Fourth quarter budget report. And again, if you have comments on that, I was asked to prepare a debt listing, so I just kind of did my own urgent. I'm open to any comments.
When it comes to the debts, like what you listed there on 78, do we ever look to, like on something that's an asset that's gonna wear out, like the second one, the Chevy Tahoe with uplift, and it's got a balance of $73,000. And compare the interest rate that we have on that money versus the interest that you're able to draw. Does it make sense to just pay the darn thing off and save that interest, that the additional interest?
Yeah,
you're paying?
I mean, the Chevy Tahoe and Uplift, we just bought last year and it was brought before the board and the board decided to finance instead of using reserves.
Oh,
So I'm not sure if we decided to change that, if I'd probably have to get board approval to pay it off, which I definitely could do. I have not looked at that particular one.
Yep.
I know Matt has looked multiple times at our WRF loan to see if we could refinance that.
Mhm.
So I believe it was not something that was gonna work in this current climate, but I think we'll look at that every so often to
Sure.
see if we can
Mhm.
refinance that.
And that could also be a side issue to the long-term planning.
Right,
As well.
right. Exactly.
okay.
Capital.
Yeah, we are
Financing.
gonna pay off the F-350 truck in a lump sum right now, just to save a little bit on interest. We got a payoff quote the other day, and we're gonna do that. Because this is the last year, it is budgeted for, so I don't need to go before the board to ask for a change in anything.
Sure.
It's just gonna save us, a little bit of money in the VACCon truck. I was working on that too, again, to get a payoff quote, but that's just one payment a year, so I don't know if there's gonna be any cost savings there. But yes, I feel like for the Chevy Tahoe in particular, yes, if we're making 5.5% on our interest, and we can save some money. I don't know what the interest rate on that
But
one is
most
off
of
the top of
But
my head.
most of our debt is probably more favorable than,
Yes,
Current
longer term
returns.
stuff
Yeah.
would be great.
Like on the WRF is 4.11%. Quite good. Any other questions, comments that can bring us back to board for, there's no public comment. So back to board for discussion and a motion. I think it's fine.
I'll move it.
Well, my only discussion is I'm gonna vote against it because I don't believe that money should be put in the reserves.
I mean, which money, the
The
admin surplus, okay.
Admin
Any other discussion?
should be redistributed.
Do we have to, I thought we talked about maybe going to legal counsel on that.
Well, yeah, this
Yeah, we
is,
have.
Okay.
we will talk about that a little bit in the next,
Right.
next one. Yeah, this is just to, the specific question here is to discuss and review and approve recommendations to board of directors, the fourth quarter budget report. So is there a motion on that?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second.
Let's move to second that we approve, basically recommend that approval of, for the board, to the board of directors of the fourth quarter budget report. Roll call. Mr. Hendrickson. Aye. Mr. Can.
Aye.
Mr. Person.
No,
Ms. Chrisman.
Aye,
Aye.
yes.
That motion passes 3 ayes, 1 nay. Moving on to the budget. Just to, I'll say a couple things because we're, just explain what this is, I think, what you got, the handout you got today, and that's been posted. We did a little bit of work on the, narrative to make sure that it was, this is basically, this was some changes, it's the narrative that was at the preliminary budget hearing.
I didn't get the handout for today.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's basically the, up till now, the budgets have had narratives with the preliminary budget only. And because it was my idea really is why we needed really something, we need the full story. With the final budget, because that's the one that people, when you go online, they'll say they want us to, the budget is the final budget. The numbers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, but the actual budget numbers are not different. The only difference is that there's a reserve calculation and a accounting for the encumbered spending between the 2 years. So, but the narrative needs to be updated to basically, it's changing the tenses a lot, you know, from present to past, you know, from like present to past. It's changing references from preliminary to final. And there were a few other tweaks that Denise did on, and I think Denise and maybe Matt did on the narrative to bring it up to date. So that's why this budget, this came in a little late because we were still working on that. So I'll, you know, hand it over to, oh wait, other thing I want to talk about was the issue of the surplus and admin. Following the direction of this committee, I made an effort to get both council's opinion and auditor's opinions on this. The auditor said, no, this is not my department. This is a legal issue. It's not an audit issue. So they said, you got to go back to your council. Our council, our regular council, Tim Carmel and David Hirsch said, they don't know. There's not a lot written about this in the literature, and the law is not clear as to how much of a surplus you can have in a fund which is funded by reimbursement, what do you call them, overhead allocations under Prop 218. So it's kind of a gray area. The last step I took was talking to Tim Carmel. He got back to me and he said, well, Bill Statler, who does the, as you know, does the analyses for the solid waste franchise fees, is an expert in municipal finance, and he might come back with some kind of opinion for Tim to pass on to us. At this point, there is no ruling opinion on this. So my
First
view,
thing we did get,
Yeah.
Chairman Gray, is
Yeah.
that Mr. Hirsch
Yeah.
talked about the leeway that you have in the Prop 218.
Yeah.
To fund non-wastewater departments
Mhm.
for future support of water departments. And so there was a section of Prop 218 that did allow for what we're doing.
Yeah.
Where we're pointing to it, where we're gonna get them, Mr. Statler's gonna help with that, but my interpretation of some of the conversations we've had in agenda review on this is that we're not doing anything
Yeah.
illegal, that it is allowed. And that when we look at the administration department and what we're required to do in support of water and wastewater, and considering what we've seen to our general fund decline over the past 3 to 4 years, trying to support facilities and resources, some of the strain that it puts on administration, that our ability to continue to fund water, wastewater, or support water and wastewater moving forward, we need to bolster up the general fund reserve. So that was our thought, is if we do have a surplus, so we charge out the overhead, we allocated the overhead, we look at the revenues and we do have a surplus, placing that back in the reserves for future support of water and wastewater, because that will continue. Water and wastewater are one of the biggest resource consuming thing for our administration department. When Denise pointed to the fact that this is a policy issue, it is. It's a policy that's been created by the agency in which we have done this in terms of past practice. I would say staff is agnostic in terms of what direction the board would like to head with this. If you want this committee that recommends to the board and the board says, yep, any surplus that we have, offset the allocation to water and wastewater for the overhead.
Water, wastewater, FNR and fire, like,
All-
it's not just,
all-
yes.
They're all of them, yeah, because they're all.
The question would revolve around water and wastewater specifically in terms of.
I'm just saying the offset would not only go to water and wastewater, it would go
Yeah.
to all overhead.
The water and wastewater one is where the Prop 218 issue comes in.
Right, that's,
Enterprise
and this is
funds.
where this seems to have really garnered some attention.
Yeah.
You know, if the board wants to set a policy, then the board sets a policy.
So that is what the auditors have conveyed to me, which our auditor was on vacations. Director Gray asked him to be here and they were unable to provide someone. But what they communicated is they audit to our policies and of
Right.
course also to GAP standards. So we're not breaking any GAP standard.
Right.
And so it's a policy, That's why I say it's a policy issue. I understand there's other things at play, but that is what the auditor's response to our questions
Right.
regarding this was. Is that they audit to our policy, and so.
And
we're
then-
not-
And then they follow those gap standards.
Mhm.
Gap
which
standards,
If
yeah.
there was an issue, when
Yeah.
we talk about the legal issues, and what
Yes.
you can and can't do, that would have been identified
Right.
in previous audits, which it
Yes.
has not.
And I think the word from, the gist of what Tim and David say is that there really this issue has not come up.
Mhm.
And so there's no one way of putting that is no one's gotten in trouble for this. You know, there's no one's made an issue of it, as long as the surplus is reasonable. Reasonable in terms of what the future needs of the admin department is in serving the enterprise funds.
Correct.
In the close to 30 years of Prop 218 being in effect, it hasn't been an issue. So that's why they couldn't find anything. I mean, there's no kind of litigation, certainly, there's no, regulations promulgated regarding it, apparently.
Mhm.
So it's kind of it's a matter of policy that, and I don't know what other districts are doing either, and maybe that's something that's worth asking, but
Mhm.
it's something that's apparently never been an issue. That rises to the point where our legal team can be aware of it.
So from a staff perspective, and I'll just leave it here
Yeah.
and let the committee discuss it. From a staff perspective, we'll follow the board direction, whatever the board wants to do. In terms of setting a new policy for this. So if this committee comes up with, some discussion about that and wants to recommend to the board that we change how that is done, then.
And we do have our overhead allocation policy subcommittee next week starting.
Right.
So I think that's like an appropriate
Yeah.
place to maybe put forward an alternative if that's something we wanted to do. My issue, just holistically looking at the financial health of the district, is if we do that, which is fine, I'm fine either way, if we do not allow, a net income from general fund for
Or
policy.
in admin, specifically admin, right?
Well, I mean, I think we would need to get very detailed, right? Because the admin net income supported FNR, right? The purchase of the restrooms. So is that allowed or should that be coming out of there?
Admin,
Absolutely not. That can't be allowed. That's not supporting wastewater and water. That's
But
supporting.
that's not
FNR.
admin's only job.
admin
is
supports
supporting
fire
the
and
district.
FNR too.
Everything.
Yeah, everything, and they
Yeah.
take an allocation from those, and they also have.
And that's, their allocation is the support for admin. Okay, if you're saying the wastewater and water's allocation is sufficient to run the admin portion, that's 74%, okay? What my issue is that 120 that we're putting into the general reserve, is that going to be paid for future admin or future fire? As it worked out on this particular one, fire and FNR both overspent. They were in the hole, okay, until we then allocated and made them whole, okay, by increasing the amount in the admin department and making the general fund as a whole, okay, well, that, you're not addressing the key issue, which is that those two funds are underfunded. And
Now we're getting- now
you're
we're-
taking money from water and wastewater to fund those.
Well, so I just want to be careful about the language we use. I don't know if we're taking money from water and wastewater. That's my only issue with using that wording. Per our policy, we do not allocate our revenues to decrease our overhead allocation. So, and fire was not in the deficit this year. It was only FNR. So fire was fine. And so I guess when we talk about this in the overhead allocation committee and come up with a thing, I just want to be really specific, like in taking this case this year where FNR was severely in a deficit because of the purchase of a restroom that we're waiting on grant funding for. So when I am allocating out my overhead allocation and taking into account that revenue, you're saying that revenue should not go to offset that deficit that includes the 200 and whatever, $17,000 for the restroom. So I just think we need to be very clear how we're gonna do it, and then I also want to be clear, because it is my job to look at the holistic financial health for the district, is how do we fund these deficits in F&R and fire? And how do we fund the ongoing maintenance and repair that we have in admin, in F&R, and in fire? Because if we don't allow us to retain any of that interest income or anything like that, then we have no way to support the
Correct.
F&R
You
and
don't.
fire.
Right.
Okay,
I
so-
agree.
So we need just as like the fiscal agent for the district, I need to think further than just this issue. I need to think that, okay, then how do we make up that gap?
Correct. The water and wastewater rates as per 218 are for those services, okay? And the administration of those services, the 74%. It is not to help fund fire and F&R.
But I don't think that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
We're paying
it's-
74% of their.
I'm gonna
But
expenditures.
you're mixing funds.
I'm gonna move things along here a little bit, because I think we're talking about policy. And we're talking about the allocation of the administrative costs, which is our subcommittee's subject. I think we need to channel that discussion. Today, we need to decide what we do in way of recommendation on this particular budget. And whether we move it on to the board. I think we're talking about, I mean, if we want to recommend, if you want to raise an issue of recommending a change in the final budget. Along those lines is one thing, but I think we have to move ahead to deal with this particular item for now. Because I do think it's an important issue, it's a policy issue. But I think it's, that's what the subcommittee is for. I think that's where we should go. And Denise, you want to say something, Ms. Prince, you want to say anything more about the narrative and the?
Yeah, so the narrative we were asked to include in the final budget. This is the first year it's been included in the final budget. So that is what Director Frey was alluding to. You have this extra copy because when he was reviewing it, he found grammatical changes, sort of thing in the narrative, as well as changing some final preliminary. So I apologize for that. As well as some board comment in the preliminary budget about tying things to strategic planning and such. So I worked with General Manager Malcolm, and he went and did some of that. So that is what's different about it. That the actual schedules in here are exactly what was presented in the preliminary budget. Nothing has changed in any of those schedules. And I think we did update the org chart just because we had a vacancy come up, so we do try and keep those things updated. It's nothing material. And the CIP list has been updated with, so that starts on page 142. So that is updated with the current numbers at the end of the year and how much I'm asking to carry forward for projects that you will see on page 154.
Yeah.
So what we do every year for those that are new and taught, is this final budget really is taking the preliminary budget, and then we asked to move forward what we're calling encumbrances, which is basically the balances in our capital projects. So this 154 is a list of what I'm asking to carry forward of projects that were not done and the balances. Now, the tables that you see on the CIP list is kind of a little bit more detail about what the budget is, what we've spent previous years, and so on. So, this, as in the general fund, I'm asking to move money forward for the East Ranch restroom, the skate park, the Betts Hall sound system. And then it also includes any funding sources that I have. So that East Ranch restroom grant that we've been talking about, of $177,000, I'm asking to move forward. The Cambria Community Council has a balance of $13,000 that I'm asking to move forward of money that they've contributed for the skate park. And then the last item you'll see on each one is the funding that I'm asking for from reserves. So that's basically, you know, we need $333,000 to finish the general fund projects that would come out of reserves. So it kind of goes down the line with water. You can see all the projects. These are all previously approved board projects that were not completed or are multi-year projects. We need to move forward these amounts, as well as the funding sources such as grant funding from Stewart Street Tank. You know, the funding for the loan for the water meter project. I had said we asked for 680,000. We've already spent a little bit of that, so I'm asking to move forward 430. And then the rest, the funding from reserves. So I'm just kind of going over this in some detail because I know some of you are new. And this is kind of an interesting way to do this, but so you can go down that list and it does correspond to these CIP lists, not to be confusing. And then the other thing that is included in the final budget is this reserve estimate on page 153. So this is taking our cash balance that's in the bank for our audit on June 30th, 2023. Our estimated fiscal year 23-24, we're still calling that estimated just because it hasn't been audited yet. The year end amounts, but this will equal what's in the fourth quarter budget. You know, as far as the general fund, 120,000, wastewater, water, WRF operations and WRF capital. And so then, what we're expecting then, cash-based reserves at June 30th, 2024. And then, you know, what we're budgeting for in the 24-25 to give you an estimate of what we would have June 30th, 2025. So this kind of will give you an idea of what we have in reserves. And then that other list, sorry, on page 154, you can see on each department what we're saying that we need from reserves to complete these projects. So.
Yeah, and the one exception is the ECMs, you know, the SST projects.
Yes.
Those are not from reserves. That's from the bond proceeds.
Correct.
Yeah, which is a
Correct.
different category. Those reserves are separate from the
Yes.
cash reserves.
Mhm.
You know, on
So like wastewater, we're saying we need 289,000 to complete those projects and they have, you know, projected 1.2 million. But one thing you have to remember too, so the way we do these capital projects is a little bit wonky, but in the preliminary budget, we've asked for new projects as well. I know for wastewater, I think we've only asked for like and full with the SFT project, so they haven't asked for that much. But, you know, water has asked for additional projects and that's all listed in the preliminary budget. So this listing is truly just those that were already approved and being asked to bring forward.
Yeah. Any questions? Got it. Karen. We missed one little update here on the title page of the final budget, under line in the table of contents.
Mhm.
We still have combined preliminary budget on page 5. This is there, I should change that.
And, you know,
That's all.
if in the narrative, I mean, Karen, if you wanna
Yeah.
give me suggestions on that, like I said, if it's not substantive, I think we can make those changes. It goes before the board August 15th, so I'll have to have, you know,
Mhm.
have that by August 8th
Yeah.
or so. So we can do that too.
This is essentially, this is the narrative with some additions that, gentleman, I think added to align the budgets with the strategic goals in other areas. I think was it fire?
I tried to add it.
Yeah, he added a few, added a
different
couple, yeah.
Sections. There was some lively conversation at a board meeting in regards to,
Yeah.
tying some of what staff looks at as budget assumptions for what we're gonna do within this year. That's more focused on this year
Yeah,
versus
right.
a 5-year strategic goal plan. So I tried to mix a little bit of both to put the main headers of our strategic goals which also have a lot of subparts to those strategic goals. So I put the headers on, and it basically said strategic goal alignment, this is what we're trying to do under this section. And here are budget assumptions that will fall under that goal.
Yeah.
Minor change, but, I think Director Thomas wanted to see something referencing those strategic goals.
Mhm.
It's a bit of a broader overarching message that we're keeping those in mind, but here's what we're targeting for this year in terms of what we want to get done.
Yeah. Any questions?
Oh.
Any further questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, Scott.
just, I aggregated just to get a difference between years, 45 federal state, that's under general fund items. What does that consist of? It's a revenue item.
What page?
I aggregated the whole budget, so I could do a year over year. So, not the exact number, but just what what that revenue item, it's mainly under fire.
So I'm not seeing that.
Okay.
Oh, federal state, it's grant revenue.
Grant revenue, okay, so that's a great,
So that's
And I-
the paper grant specifically.
okay, so,
Yeah.
okay, got it.
I don't know
Yeah.
why that category says federal state. Maybe I should make it grant.
No, no worries.
Yeah.
I can make those changes. It's just in the system.
Just like, in general, what, what.
Yes,
variances
that's grant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just know in fire, that's specifically the safer grant.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I do have a more general question, just
Yeah.
in my information.
Yeah.
So in the question that, that we're talking about as far as that money being able to be reallocated, short of doing that, where does the money come from? How do you balance that, those other two accounts that are in the red, if you can't move money from?
It would come out of the reserves that we have for, so
There's
Okay,
over $3 million in reserves
okay,
now.
so. The reserves money can only come from the other programs from. I guess I've kind of got this confused in my mind now,
Mhm.
but if we can't use that money, if we can't put that money against those other departments overruns,
Mhm.
then that means that the reserves can only consist of those other departments. Is that not correct?
So our general fund now, reserves is comprised of, and I'd have to go back and see, there's definitely, I have looked, like, there was definitely a year that it jumped up, and I would have to go research why the reserves increased so much in the general fund. I don't know the reason for that. So the general fund is reserves are comprised of the combination of admin, FNR, and fire. Anything,
Surpluses in those.
surpluses and deficits combined, and that's what general fund reserves are.
Right. So
Is that your
the
question?
reserves of the administrative enterprise funds are totally separate because they come out of the enterprise revenue stream and
Sure,
then
just the
expenses
water
for
and
water and
sewer
sewer, water and wastewater, yeah.
Okay,
You can't,
So-
you can't commingle them.
But isn't that what we're doing?
yes.
Well, I struggle with the commingling. Nothing was commingled. We
Yeah,
have a
okay.
policy that says we take all of our expenditures and admin and we allocate them out to the different departments for the services that admin provides. And it's the policy for the CCSD that was created however long ago, which we're gonna be discussing next week. That 100% of the expenditures get allocated out in this admin overhead allocation.
But
And
not surplus.
no,
just
not the
100%.
surplus, 100% of the expenditures.
Right.
Yes. So it gets allocated out to water, wastewater, fire, and
FNR.
ethanol.
Right.
Okay, so that's that. So admin does take in some revenue, and so that is what is making up this net income. So I totally understand what Mr. Pearson is saying, and I get discussion for both sides. And I think my utility manager would definitely say, like, yes, let's put that towards reduction, any revenue coming in. But I guess I just want to be really careful about the language being used, that we're taking money from
Yeah,
wastewater, that we're commingling funds. That's not what's happening.
And when we
What we're
look at-
doing is we're not allocating revenue to reduce the expenditures that we are then allocating out.
When we talk
per
about
policy.
revenue, admin gets no revenue.
Well, it
right?
gets-
It's not
It gets,
funded,
it actually gets, it has a revenue stream.
but it's
It's
not.
not from the enterprise.
It's all, it has separate revenue. It gets the revenue from the wastewater, I mean, actually, solid waste franchise fees. And then a little bit of property tax, I mean, it's in there.
Mhm.
It's about the size of
SB
that.
1090, which I'm not really sure what SB 1090
Yeah, it gets a
is, but
certain amount that is independent. That's its revenue and it's not coming from anybody else other than,
And it gets
So
the
source-
interest, and it gets the interest
and
rate.
interest, yeah, and interest. So,
And that's fractional of what it would take to operate admin.
but then again, I think we have to get, I don't want to go too far off on this because
Well,
you and Mr.
But
You
so,
and
I
Scott
mean, I
are on
just-
that subcommittee, right?
Yes, and no.
No, me.
I am.
Oh, you
Keith and
are,
David,
okay.
yeah. So
Gotcha.
I think it's a great conversation and I'm interested to have it and I understand the thing. I just like to be careful about the language being used. I
Yeah,
don't
sure.
think we're taking money. I don't think we're taking revenues. I think we're not commingling. It's
Yeah.
just the way we're administering our admin overhead
Yeah.
allocation. And if we want to change it, let's change it.
does the allocation need to be a hard percentage or can it float so that it
It has
covers
to be-
whatever,
I think it has to
whatever
be
it
a
is to
good
break
faith.
even?
Well,
Good
you're
faith
gonna see,
estimate of actual,
It has to.
you're gonna
that's-
see how we calculate it now and it's very, very interesting. Hence
okay.
this conversation. And we had to take it out of the budget policy to discuss it further.
Yeah.
Because
It's complicated.
it's complicated
Yeah.
Yeah.
at best.
There are different ways to do it,
Yeah.
and you do have to have a formula that you apply. It has to be, you know,
You have to have a methodology.
you have to have a methodology that development that gives you a formula
Mhm.
that you apply to the budget.
So you have a hard
but
percentage.
if
So
if you make
74
a
is
good
hard.
faith estimate to allocate
Uh-huh.
actual expense,
Yeah.
you're not even thinking about revenue. I think you've done your job.
Yeah,
There's
that's
different
it.
ways to do it, and different people can disagree on
I
what
get
the,
that.
what the accurate is, but if you're good faith and you're allocating
So,
expenses,
I think this is getting,
I
again,
mean, that's, yeah.
this is a very good, it's a very important task and the subcommittee is starting on the right away, right?
Yeah, we're meeting next
Excellent.
week
So-
and I'll send you
Let's-
how we calculate our current overhead, so you
Right.
can.
Let's move over, so we're not rushed on the purchasing policy. Do I have any further discussion here or? Yeah.
Just
More
real
questions?
quick under wastewater, year over year capital outlays, we had about 2 million and change for the year just ended, and we're budgeting about 80,000, so it's, almost a $2 million variance. So
So,
like, just what assumptions might go into that or what,
if you're, and you were probably looking maybe at the preliminary budget, so 2 million is the SST projects, which are kind of, those are bond funded.
Okay.
I'm not saying all of it is SST, but the large majority.
Yeah.
And so in the preliminary budget, it's 90,000 because that's when I said wastewater actually isn't asking for much this year because they are kind of have their hands full with the SST projects. And so 90,000 is what would be in the preliminary budget.
Mhm.
And then in this encumbrance carry forward that I'm asking for, you'll see the SST projects that is left. I mean, it's like 8 million something, but every time we spend that, I bring in money from the bond funds to cover those
Okay.
expenditures.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Any other questions? There's no public comment. No public. So let's bring this back to, bring back to the board for discussion and motion. Not at the board, sorry, discussion of the motion. It's in my.
and
So we're looking. As a,
We're looking at, the question
does
is,
this replace the cover on the?
well, this
No.
is actually incorporated, this is incorporated into the document that we're recommending, or doing a recommendation on. And any changes, I'll say that any changes that need to be made in the narrative or elsewhere would be non-substantive and could be done by Ms. Fritz and Karen
And just a newbie question before we move, the allocation, would result in a rebudget during the year.
Ah.
If we change the methodology, we would, like, it would change, because it would change what the current budget is, which is done under the old allocation method.
I think it would be for the new budget.
I
Okay.
think the board can decide, I mean, if they. direct
Okay,
me to
normally,
change
I
it,
think
but
just
yeah,
keep things from getting too chaotic.
It would
I
be
think you want
25.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
okay,
it was
that's
scramble everything.
That's fine. Like I said, newbie question.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, anyway, so I would note that in motion, to include this minor correction on the front page. Under the combined preliminary budget to combine, final budget, otherwise. I do need a motion to, whether recommend this or not to the board, the full board.
So
Come on, it's been moved, seconded.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded that the committee recommended adoption of the recommend that the board adopt the final budget as presented to us with any non-substantive changes in the narrative of the form in the meantime. Can I have a roll call? Anderson, aye. Mr. McCann?
Aye.
Ms. Chrisman?
Aye.
Mr. Pearson?
No,
The motion passes 3-1, 3 with 1 dissent and 1 absent. Now to move on to the purchasing policy. Let me give this sufficient time for explanations and discussion. I don't know, do you, Mr. McElhenney and Ms. Fritz probably have to present. Do you want to? Mr. McElhenney, you want to? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. Yeah.
So this is to discuss, review, and approve the purchasing policy revisions and approve any recommendations to the CCSD Board of Directors. So, Ms. Nelson and I have been working on this, purchasing policy for quite a while. I think our current one was from 2015, so quite a while ago.
Mhm.
And our process was looking at other CSDs and what their purchasing policies were to get kind of a baseline to see where people were. And then we went through and what it resulted in a very, very different document. So we've included both documents in here. Our draft of the new policy, which we feel kind of meets more with like current standards of what we saw with other districts and their policies. And if anything, it's more than what is in our current policy. And our current policy starts on page 173. And I know it's a lengthy document. And there's a lot of information in here. So I'm happy to entertain any questions. This has been reviewed by our legal counsel. There were some changes made to make sure that we were including all legal jargon that needed to be included in the areas that it needed to be included in. So like I said, I feel like it includes more. One thing, on page 162, there's some, for me, this is helpful to visualize. There's some tables to kind of look at limits and what it means for each type of purchase, which is helpful for me when administering the policy and making sure we're meeting it. There's so much that's changed that I can't just say like, here are the changes, and they're not in red line. But I would say that there's nothing left out of the old one. If anything, we just added more to it to be more current.
So,
I got
yeah, 8 questions, yeah.
a couple of things.
Okay,
First, I think you did a marvelous job. Great job. It's much more clear.
Mhm.
It's much better defined. When I was on the board, I kept asking the staff to do this because I didn't have the board to do this, and you've done a great job.
thank you.
Question. It seems to me that way back when we got the new financial software, it was going to be a purchase order process that made it much easier. Instead of sending paper around everybody, it was gonna be, is that true?
Yeah, we have Laserfiche and
We're implementing within Tyler this year.
Right.
That we're, so I would say when I got here, the way the district did purchase orders is not typically what I would call business standard.
Right.
And so, we are starting what I would consider more, like normal use of purchase orders within Tyler, which kind of, it was set up in there, but they weren't. So more of our larger contracts we're putting as purchase orders in Tyler, which gives signing limits. So like the general manager, if it's above these certain levels, he has to sign off on it and everything else, which we do now, but like you said, we do it all on paper. And this also, what it does is, if you ever notice in our budgets, the encumbrance line is always 0. We don't have any encumbrance in there. So this will actually encumber funds, which also helps us as, accounts payable to make sure that we're not overpaying on contracts and everything. Right now, everything is kept track of on spreadsheets and stuff. So we are going to, this year, where we implemented it, and we're starting with the bigger contracts and then working our way down to see which ones we want to actually include in the software to make sure that we're.
Okay, the idea that I understood back then was that the wastewater supervisor would need something for $5,000. He would put a PO into Tyler and basically approve it, right? It would then electronically go to your desk, okay? And you would electronically approve it and boom, off it went. And everything was cool, right? And then when the invoice, okay, came in, you would match it to that, and that match it to that PO, all within the system, and it would be paid.
Yes.
Is that
And you'll see,
eventually what you're gonna?
that
get
is
to?
going to be happening this year, and I'll try and point it out in the quarter reports when you can see it. Because yes, you will see, and so what you'll see is you'll see the encumbrance, and then as we're paying invoices, the encumbrance will reduce and, the expense will come over, and so it should be clear to see, okay, in this line item, say vehicles, or
Anytime you wanna
whatever.
look at it, how much more are we gonna get billed on a particular
Yes,
item?
yes,
Wonderful.
yes. So we
One-
have implemented that this year, and we're working, we're starting kind of slower, I think we have about 10 or 15, and then we'll slowly, bring on more. So the way it was utilized before was for like very small item dollar amounts that were set for every month, like there was not really a question. And so I want to use it more for like project tracking, big budget items that, those contracts, task order contracts and stuff like that, so we can see.
So are you taking this to the policy committee next?
This purchasing, yes.
Good luck there.
Well,
I came here first.
I know, I agree with all of it, including the numbers, okay, for the approvals.
Yes, we increased.
That's where you're gonna get a lot of pushback.
Yes. So right now, just so you guys, if you didn't have a chance to read this in the last day and a half or however long it's been out, is that we have to create a purchase order for anything over $250. That's like not industry standard and stuff. So that's one of the big things I'm assuming people are gonna kind of not,
Well,
we're
and
trying to increase it.
I mean,
Yes.
the last time we upped the general manager's approval to $25,000, there was a uproar
Mhm.
from
Well, of course,
people.
they,
And that was
Yeah.
way too much.
Yeah, and we're
I'll
asking
give
for
it
a
more
purchase
than
order
that.
limit
So
to
that's
be
gonna
raised to
be-
5,000. Which is a big change from $250 to 5,000, but I mean, we're writing purchase orders and we're not putting purchase orders in the system if it's $250, it's just not
I
worth
think-
it.
yeah, the bottom line is that we are both advisory committees. And the board makes the final decision. If we like this as it is, we should remember that the board will be told that, if the policy committee really wants to change it, we come back with changes. The board can always go with what we want, we recommend, and I think that
Yeah, I understand.
our advice is probably pretty meaningful in this case. Given some of the adventures the policy committee has had, I don't want to go to that tonight. But, I just, I think it's great too. I mean, it's much more. It gets away from some of the side issues. There's a long thing in the old one about small minority businesses, women's business enterprise and labor service surplus area firms that were there to be favored or whatever, but we're talking about a market for services and a range of contractors so small that that's kind of a federal program kind of thing in a way. We're not really in that.
Right.
We're trying to do local. We are trying to buy local, that's in there. I mean, we're trying to favor local and small businesses, but to get that level of detail about like you're doing they say kind of an SBA program or something. It's just, cannot too much and get away from, we can stay away from stuff. We just stick with, procedures. It's very clearly defined and amounts that are, realistic in today's
Yes,
dollars.
realistic
Realistic
and
today's dollars,
manageable.
which I think is fine. I mean,
Fair to
it's-
say, if you get 2 to 3 competitive, I mean, you might not even be able to get 2 to 3.
right, very often can't, very often can't, yeah,
And,
so.
and Denise and Haley did a good job of modernizing this
Yeah,
policy
yeah.
and making it comparable to what other agencies are doing. Considering where we're headed as a district in terms of the things that we're spending money on infrastructure wise, projects. We're a little hamstrung at times when things do come up, unless we trigger it's emergency every single time, with some of these limits that we're being placed with. I mean, it's scary to talk about, but this transmission line that we're dealing with, it's gone from. What was gonna be 2 million, now could be 4 million because State Parks wants us to trench up Highway 1. These are the types of projects that are expanding rapidly, cost wise. Different types of things that happen in the district just with our water and wastewater infrastructure. We have 2 engines right now that are down, so there's things that are just happening in the district that, we as administration would just like to be able to handle rapidly within the appropriate limits. But
Right,
our belief is that those limits.
You have to be able to do that. You have to run your business.
yeah, exactly, so.
It's not, it's not like I want, any of these committees or the board to just cut me loose with it.
Yeah.
Like checks, so.
Well, and there's always the checks and balance of,
No, of course.
they look at what you have done.
Right.
Right,
And if they don't like it, they can talk to you about
and they do, as low as, I think. Anywhere between $400,000 or $500,000, I get asked about it, so they're very, Director Thomas is very thorough. Any vendor that we spend money with that he hasn't seen before, he asks about,
Yeah.
So the board's doing their due diligence in there as well.
We have checks and balances.
Yeah, exactly.
Every month we have the expense report, it shows who gets paid what, and, yeah, it's all there.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's after the fact, like, hopefully
Right.
we're doing our due diligence, but we are a small but mighty team. I always like to say that, like, there's not many of us doing all of this work and it's hard. That's why doing as much stuff as we can with the checks and balances through the software is helpful to us because, trying to keep track of everything by spreadsheet and every invoice that comes through, it's difficult, right, for one person to
it.
do.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's not efficient, and so it is modernizing it. It's also, increasing some limits to be more industry standard and that sort of thing, but also we are audited against our policies. It's one thing that drilled home with me. So this is a very detailed policy, I'm gonna have to learn this backwards and forwards to make sure that we are complying with all of this because we will be audited against this to make sure we're getting the appropriate signatures for dollar amounts and this and everything else. So we tried to make it as thorough as possible without, being burdensome, but
If I may, what's the drop dead for getting this to the policy committee and board?
I don't think I don't know if there's a drop dead.
I think all we do, we send it back to the board. The board kind of, will decide, how to channel the policy committee basically, because we're not trying to advise the policy committee at all. It's strictly for the board.
Okay, so we're gonna go straight to the board with this and then they will send it to policy?
I would assume that would be it. I don't know if,
What
I
does it say?
think the policy committee wanted to review it before the board did, so the way I understood it was coming to you guys. Into policy and then to the board.
Mhm.
So it's currently on the August 22nd agenda. for
okay,
the
I mean,
policy
what we
committee.
are voting on today, though, specifically is a recommendation to the board of directors. So this is, the board of directors will see our recommendation.
Yes,
Yes.
I think
It
that
won't get,
when we go,
edited by the policy committee or anything like that, exactly.
I think when we go before the board, they will have your comments and they will have policies comments. And then,
Right.
I'm not going to combine any changes or comments.
Very important to
Okay,
know.
Scott, did you wanna delay it or something?
Well, the only, I can't say I went through it as much
Yeah.
detail as I would like, just because of the other burden, that we had. One thing that I'd like to see is some recognition of, major capital projects that might have a threshold for spending on the initial, outlay, but that obligate us to future cash flows. Every major capital project has, like the water meters and the software. And once you make the decision to go that way, that obligates you to years of additional.
Well, isn't there something?
And that's the thing, I may have
Over-
overlooked it.
It's not overrun so specifically, there's a. I have to go back to the,
So what are you?
Public Works, it's in the,
If there's. In here, if there's any system that we obligate ourselves that has a, let's just follow a spending limit of. 200,000 or less, but that also will obligate us to future cash flows to support it.
Mhm.
I always go back to my aircraft experience, when I bought an airframe or engine system. A lot went into that, and that was like decades of, ground costs, fuel costs, et cetera. There's a lot of expenses that go along with a nominal sounding amount that may go far in excess. And when we looked at the water meter issue recently. There probably is only one vendor, for that. But when you buy something, it's like the Gillette razor. You buy the razor, it might cost $5, but you gotta buy all the blades down the line for the rest of your life. Some recognition of that, or some way that a mechanism gets tripped in here. For major projects that might have associated future cash flows. And again, I didn't get to go through this in detail.
I
but that's
don't
like-
know if we specifically. So mechanism that gets tripped as far as it going back before for approval, or that we acknowledge that it has
Correct.
future cash flows?
Right, and even if they're not totally quantifiable. That it's not, not necessarily, like I said, for Public Works, we have 200,000 in here.
So if you guys read, take that, Public Works, because that's capital, right?
Mhm.
C.
Yeah.
When you guys read that. Are you reading that it doesn't need to go before the board until it's 200,000 plus? So that's been one of my,
Right, exactly.
So I was verbally told when I started here, anything capital needs to go before the board.
Right,
Well, capital is
okay,
classified as over $5,000.
okay.
It's not written in the policy anywhere that way.
Mhm.
So. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying with that, I'm just putting it out
But
there, like,
also
does
when-
that need to be in the,
But
because,
also when you send it to the board, that the board is aware that it's not just that initial outlay, that there are
and I,
implied and necessary future costs that are gonna go along with that to
and
support.
I think we do say that when we
Okay.
go before the board,
That's-
like
that-
with the influent effluent line, we definitely have said. This is a project, the design cost is gonna be 60,000, we're asking for that now, but we know it's gonna be, we don't know how much.
Yeah.
I think the water meter was the same way, and with something like that, we have to go back. For approval. Anytime it changes,
Mhm.
like if we need more money,
Yeah,
like,
that's the thing about, there's nothing in here, that says if your contract for, $500,000 project, if it goes over, you can't just spend the extra money. It has to go back to the board, right, for,
Oh, there's a 10% limit on
10% limit, well, above 10%, then there was a
Were you
limit.
seeing that?
I saw that too, but above 10%, you do have to go back to the board.
it. Yeah, on 167. For purchase order preparation. Eight.
Yeah.
Well,
I know-
page
I know I saw it
167, so far as it does not conflict with any other policy, purchase order may be exceeded by 10%. No increase may be given for
So
quarter.
what I'm really saying is I'm playing for time, a little bit more time to review it and make sure that we have that kind of thing covered if we have that kind of time.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it could be done revised later on.
So when is it going before policy?
It's going before policy on August 22nd, and I currently have it on September 19th agenda for discussion.
Hmm.
I mean, since we're not meeting in August, I mean, we could try and meet earlier in September,
A special meeting.
a special meeting earlier in September.
Or we push it to October for board approval.
We could do that.
Do that too.
Yeah,
I
we're
mean,
not, I mean, I'd prefer to get this right than get it. I mean,
I would too.
it's a big policy.
Yes.
And I don't think we're in a huge, we're gonna be, I mean, once this is approved, I think we'll be audited against it from the date of approval. And so like, I'm going into the 23-24 audit, that's gonna be under the old policy.
Mhm.
I'd rather get it right, I guess. I'll
So we're,
leave it
so
at
we're
that.
not gonna be audited against this until the completion of the 24-25 fiscal year.
Correct.
Right.
So I,
So if we postponed it, our consideration of it until after the policy committee consideration, we would still want to have this version before us, right? Not.
Yeah,
something
it'll
from the
be this
policy.
version.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We won't be making any changes
That's good.
based on the policy. It'll just be, we'll make notes.
Yeah.
For the board's consideration.
And I mean, Scott, you can formulate, more detail what you're looking for.
sure,
Exactly, kind of a policy, because there's a very simple kind of 10%, cushion or over,
but say,
overage.
I think
Think
my
that's all we
concern
have.
is if we go with contractor A and because we're locked into their system for all eternity, instead of B, when B was actually, some of their costs were better in the forward years, but we didn't take that into consideration in the competitive bidding process.
Yeah,
You're getting into the bidding process itself then, right?
True.
How to
which
consider
does
bids,
not, is not outlined, like rules on how to.
How to do bidding, how to assess bids.
Mhm.
Those are incorporated there are some rules in government code, and there are legal rules that are incorporated by reference here, but we don't get into the details of
Right.
that. So I don't know, would that be, I say, are you suggesting something a little beyond the scope of this policy? Or are you comfortable voting on it today, or you want to,
I'd rather kick
okay.
the can down the
Keep
road
it down
one
the road,
month.
That's fine,
I'm good at that.
that's fine. Any other, Karen?
I have a question, and this has not to do with grammar or consistency. Denise and I will meet about that offline. On page 169 in paragraph 5.1, the last sentence says, public projects that do not exceed the dollar limits in public contract code, blah, blah, may be let to contract by informal procedures. I'm sorry to report that let to contract doesn't make sense to me, but I assume that's standard language for this kind of thing, let to contract?
I've heard that before.
I'll have to see is that a change that Tim made? Let me open up this document. That might be a change.
I think I looked at it, and I think it is not a change. But if you all understand that terminology, then it makes perfect sense, but I don't understand it. Just doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I think it was standard in the purchasing policies that we've reviewed,
That's the end, thank you.
but
That's, no,
I'll
no,
do a
no.
little more digging to see exactly. I mean, I
If
should know what
it's
it
standard,
And I
in
can't
those
give you-
kinds of areas, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually, just to show you, I read the whole thing. I had a couple little edits to do. Just we come back with it. On page 157, under the purpose. The very last line of that first paragraph, requirements contained with federal regulations. It seems like in federal regulations would be more appropriate. In those last 5 words.
Yes.
Yeah.
Within.
Contained in federal regulations. Rather than with. And under definitions, capital equipment. It sounds to me like, you should say equipment with a useful life of 2 years or more and more than $5,000. Value of more than $5,000. Just to
Yeah.
clarify that what you're talking about there when you're talking about $5,000. And one other thing, there's a missing zero in one of these numbers. On page, oh wait, there are a couple of them here. One of the one I found. Oh. Page 165.
Can you reference the page number of the actual policy? Because I'm making your
Oh,
pages live.
Page 10, page 10, D, section 2. The equipment and or supplies to be purchased by CCSD are substantially similar. Because of the word supplies, and the missing zero. It's somewhere, here it is on page 16. Third item down is item D. Checks the amount of $100, comma 000.
Yeah.
So I guess what we'll do is we will continue this item till our next meeting. With everybody's consent, we can just go ahead.
Okay.
Any, just to wind things up, any future agenda item suggestions? We have plenty to do, actually. Any public comments?
Need public.
I don't public. Well, anyway, thank you. It's a very productive meeting. We had a productive discussion on the budget policy and budget policies, and I think the ad hoc subcommittee is going to have an interesting task on allocation of administrative expenses. With no further ado, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you.